Iran is firing on the United States Navy in the Strait of Hormuz today. Iran's Fars news agency reported sporadic clashes between Iranian and US naval forces in the strait this morning, confirmed by Al Jazeera. Simultaneously, Secretary of State Marco Rubio told reporters that Washington should receive Iran's response to its peace proposal today, Friday, May 9th. I want you to hold those two facts together. Iran is firing on American naval forces in Hormuz, while America is waiting for Iran's response to a peace deal. Both of these things are happening at the same time, and the fact that they are happening simultaneously is not a contradiction. It is Iran's strategy made visible.
It is the dual track that Iran has been running throughout this entire conflict. Military pressure and diplomatic engagement operating in parallel, each one serving the other, and it is exactly the reason why the one-page memorandum that was supposedly close to being signed is not close to being signed. Let me explain what the clashes today tell you about the deal, and what the deal tells you about the clashes. What the clashes in Hormuz mean, precisely, Iran's Fars news agency is Iran's official state news agency. When it reports sporadic clashes between Iranian and US naval forces in Hormuz, it is reporting something the IRGC wants the world to know about. It is not a leak, it is a communication. The communication is this: Iran is still fighting in the strait while reviewing a peace proposal. That combination is the IRGC's message to Washington, to the international community watching, and to Iran's own domestic audience that reviewing a peace proposal is not the same as moving toward accepting it. The clashes come 3 days after American bombs fell on Iranian coastal cities, Bandar Kamir, Sirik, and Keshem Island. They come 2 days after Iran's air defenses were active over western Tehran. They come 4 days after the U.S. Navy escorted two commercial vessels through Hormuz under fire, sinking 7 Iranian boats in the process. Real Iranian forces, real American naval forces, real sporadic clashes in the same strait that has been closed to 90% of commercial shipping since March 4th, in the same strait where 1,600 ships are stuck, where 10 sailors have died, where America is waiting for a peace response and simultaneously fending off Iranian attacks. The clashes are not a new phase of the conflict. They are the continuation of the old phase, the same phase that has been running beneath every ceasefire announcement, every diplomatic breakthrough, every claimed great progress since April 8th. The shooting did not stop, the framing changed. Why the deal is collapsing. The specific gap. Let me explain why the one-page memorandum that America has been promoting as close to signing is not close to signing. Because the gap between the two parties is not a communication problem, it is a substance problem. And substance problems do not resolve because both sides are patient. America's proposal, as Trump described it publicly, requires Iran to ship its enriched uranium stockpile to the United States and pledge not to operate its underground nuclear facilities. The memorandum would then trigger a 30-day period during which nuclear demands, Iranian asset unfreezing, and Hormuz security would be negotiated. Iran's position is that all issues should be resolved within 30 days, and that the lifting of the blockade must accompany any Hormuz arrangement, not follow it. The gap has two specific dimensions. First, the uranium custody question, Iran shipping its enriched uranium to American custody, the country that launched the bombing campaign, is politically unsellable inside Iran. The IRGC's institutional identity is built on the principle that external pressure produces resistance, not accommodation. An IRGC that ships Iran's uranium to Washington while sporadic clashes continue in Hormuz is an IRGC that has contradicted its own foundational identity. The commanders who have been running Iran's wartime government since February 28th cannot accept this outcome without destroying the political legitimacy that has sustained their authority throughout the conflict. Russia's uranium custodianship offer a third-party solution that removes the uranium from Iranian territory to Russian facilities under IAEA verification without giving it to American custody would bridge this gap. Trump rejected it. The administration has not explained why, and without that mechanism, the uranium custody question remains the most specific obstacle to any deal. Second, The Hormuz sequencing question. Iran wants the blockade lifted before or simultaneously with any Hormuz arrangement. America wants Hormuz open before considering blockade lifting. Both positions are domestically defensible for each government. Neither is domestically defensible for the other. That is the definition of a genuine negotiating impasse. Not a misunderstanding, not a communication gap, but two positions that cannot be simultaneously satisfied by a single sequence. The clashes in Hormuz today are happening because that impasse has not been resolved. The firing is the answer to the proposal, a military answer, but an answer. What Rubio's today means Rubio told reporters that Washington should receive Iran's response today. I want to explain what that specific statement tells you about where the negotiation actually stands. A party that has agreed in principle to a deal does not need to convey its response through Pakistani mediators on a Friday deadline. A party that has agreed in principle calls its mediator and says, "We are ready." The fact that Iran is conveying a response rather than an agreement means Iran has terms, conditions, modifications, or objections it is communicating through the channel. A response is not an acceptance. A response is the beginning of a counter negotiation, and Iran is conveying that response while its naval forces are in sporadic clashes with American naval forces in Hormuz. That context shapes how any Iranian response will be interpreted. If Iran's response includes modifications to the uranium custody terms, if it proposes Russian or neutral third party custody rather than American custody, America's response to that modification will determine whether the deal is still close or whether it has moved further away. And that exchange cannot happen today. It requires time that the Beijing summit's 5-day countdown is rapidly consuming. What the Beijing timeline means for today's clashes. The Beijing summit is 5 days away, May 14th and 15th. Trump meets Xi Jinping, and the clashes in Hormuz today are the most important signal yet about what kind of summit that will be. If Iran's response today accepts the one-page framework, even with modifications, the summit becomes a venue for implementing the framework. Both sides arrive with something signed. If Iran's response today proposes modifications that America cannot accept without further negotiation, and the clashes suggest Iran is not in a conciliatory mode today, the summit becomes something more complicated. Trump arrives having threatened higher bombing while holding an unsigned agreement and an active Hormuz fire exchange. Xi arrives having hosted Araghchi, knowing Iran's real terms, and holding the economic leverage that has kept Iran functional throughout the conflict. China's economic relationship with Iran has not been a neutral fact in this conflict. China's shadow fleet delivered Iranian crude above pre-war export levels throughout the American blockade. China's CIPS payment system processed Iran's oil revenue. China bought Iranian crude at discounted rates, while American consumers pay 52% more at the pump. When Trump arrives in Beijing in 5 days, Xi will be the most informed party in the room. He will know what Iran's response contained. He will know the specific gap on uranium custody. He will know whether the clashes in Hormuz today represent Iran's final military statement before an agreement or its opening position in a resumed conflict. That information advantage is China's leverage at the summit, and the clashes today have made it larger, not smaller. What the American families watching this need to understand. There are American naval forces in the Strait of Hormuz today in sporadic clashes with Iranian forces. There are 1,600 commercial ships stuck in the strait. At least 10 sailors have died. Gasoline costs 52% more than it did on February 27th. The one-page memorandum is still unsigned. Iran is conveying its response through Pakistani mediators while simultaneously firing on American naval forces. And the most important diplomatic summit of this conflict, Beijing, 5 days away, approaches with the deal unsigned and the clashes ongoing. The people who built this conflict strategy calculated that maximum American military pressure would produce Iranian capitulation in weeks. That calculation has not been validated in 80 days. Iran is still in Hormuz. Iran is still firing. Iran's response today is not capitulation. It is a counter-proposal being delivered under fire. The 52% gasoline premium, the 1,600 stuck ships, the 10 dead sailors, the 5 days until Beijing. These are the costs of a strategy that overestimated how quickly Iranian resistance would collapse and underestimated how durable Iran's position would prove with Chinese economic support behind it. Watch what happens in the next 5 days, not what is announced, what the oil price does. Because if the deal comes together before Beijing, oil prices will drop before any announcement is made. Markets price reality in real time. They will tell you whether the clashes in Hormuz today were the last military exchange before a deal or the opening shots of the next phase. Iran fired on the US Navy today. America's deal is collapsing, the clashes are ongoing, and Beijing is 5 days away. Watch the oil price.